What if I told you that the most powerful statement of the season did not come from a pilot or Ferrari, but Toto Wolff? In the ultra-competitive environment of Formula One, where loyalties are diluted quickly as the contracts are signed and break, listening to Toto Wolff refer to Lewis Hamilton as part of the Mercedes family after the British driver signed with Ferrari was something that paralyzed the paddock. Not only because of the unexpected content, but for the moment it was pronounced. This was not a phrase said in a relaxed context or for nostalgic purposes. She was launched in the middle of a media storm, just when Hamilton faced her first great crisis as a Ferrari pilot. At that moment, public opinion began to build a very clear narrative. Hamilton was failing in Ferrari. His performance was irregular, the technical adaptations did not curdle, and the pilot himself was vulnerable in statements where he admitted to feeling useless after the Hungary GP. The Wolff intervention timing then was not accidental. It was surgical, it was strategic, and it was blunt. What Wolff did, intentional or not, was to recover Hamilton symbolically, claim him as someone who, although he is dressed in red, continues to represent the values of Mercedes. This not only left the press bewildered, but also Ferrari, who began to ask, and rightly, their new star signing still responded emotionally or ideologically to another flag. In addition, there is a more subtle but equally powerful reading. Wolff is saying, in a low but firm voice, that the narrative of Hamilton's decline is false. That what we are seeing is not a worn champion, but a misunderstood. That behind that inconsistent performance there is a misunderstood technical context and, above all, a potential still intact. In other words, while the rest of the paddock buries Hamilton, Wolff is publicly resurrected. We cannot forget that Toto Wolff is a man who rarely leaves room for improvisation. Each public appearance is calibrated, each phrase has an intention. So when he says that Hamilton is still important for us, he is doing much more than being cordial. Hamilton's fight in Ferrari is one of those stories where talent and legend are not enough, because it's not just a change of colors. It is an extremely complex technical adaptation. The SF25 is a deeply different car from any Mercedes that Hamilton has piloted. Not only at the design level, but in driving philosophy, in the way the car responds, in how it transmits information to the pilot. And that has created a structural disconnection between the car and who drives it. One of the most problematic areas has been the brake system. For someone like Hamilton, who builds much of his advantage in the precision of braking, the erratic behavior of the SF25 in this area has been devastating. He defined it as a lottery. One day has feedback, the next disappears. Ferrari's brake-by-wire, combined with a little intuitive motor braking response, has neutralized one of Hamilton's greatest talents: its extreme sensitivity to the adherence limit when braking. Maranello engineers, aware of the challenge, have worked intensely to adjust motor maps and MGUK parameters. But the problem is not so much that the system fails, but does not deliver the right sensation. Technically, the car does what it should, but Hamilton doesn't feel it. And in F1, what is not felt is not controlled. What is not controlled does not risk. And what does not risks does not earn races. This has added a structural change that has completely altered the interaction of the car with the pilot. The front suspension. Ferrari abandoned the pushrod system to adopt a pool configuration, seeking to improve the flow of air to the rear of the car and increase aerodynamic flexibility. In theory, a necessary evolution. In practice, a transformation that has completely altered the behavior of the car at the curve entrance. While Leclerc, formed in this design philosophy for years, has managed to adapt faster, Hamilton is at a break between two worlds. The car reacts before what he expects. There is no clear communication between the front and its natural driving style. Consequently, it has had to modify its technique, even migrating towards a style more similar to that of Leclerc. Release the accelerator before, use less brake, load more input speed. Something that, although it has begun to give results, keeps it in a state of constant transition, far from its best version. The paradox is that Hamilton is working harder than ever. He admits to having dedicated hours with engineers, analyzing data, studying telemetrias, experimenting with setups. But even with all that dedication, learning has not accelerated to the desired rhythm. And that has been frustrating because the pilot hoped that the accumulated experience would be enough to shorten the path to competitiveness. But this time is not enough. This is Hamilton's real fight in Ferrari. It is not against Verstappen. It is not against Leclerc. It is against a car that does not speak its language. Against a machine that has not yet learned to interpret your style. And in a category where the tenths are a difference between glory and mediocrity, that disconnection becomes an immense emotional and competitive burden. But there is an element that cannot be ignored. Lewis Hamilton is not broken. It is in the process of reinvention. He is rebuilding his chemistry with the car. And if it manages to close that gap, if the SF25 evolves in the direction of its needs, which today is frustration, can be transformed into a real threat to the championship. Because when a champion begins to adapt, the rest must start worrying. The initial results of the 2025 season have not been catastrophic, but disappointing if measured in relation to expectations. In the Australian Grand Prix, Hamilton barely managed to add a point. In classification, both cars were far from the fight for pole, and in the race the strategy collapsed for poorly calculated decisions in front of the rain. Worse, Hamilton's debut with Ferrari left a very symbolic image. He was pushed off his track by his own partner, Charles Leclerc, in the first curve. There was no serious damage. But he left a clear impression. There is no synchrony. Ferrari faces a delicate internal situation. Leclerc, the man in the house who has built his career with the Scuderia, is forced to share the prominence with a figure that comes from outside, which arrives with greater pommeries and media attention, but who has not yet managed to impose himself on the track. The dynamics between the two is far from being fluid. Despite his efforts, Hamilton has not been able to make a clear difference against Leclerc, and that feeds tensions both within the team and in the external narrative. The Italian press already begins to suggest that the experiment is not working, and that, in Ferrari, is dynamite. Technical, the SF25 has shown mixed signs. Its straight speed is competitive. Its classification capacity in high-load circuits such as China has improved. But in the race there are still doubts. Degradation, inconsistent behavior with different compounds, and the lack of total adaptation to the two piloting styles, that of Leclerc and Hamilton, have generated a problem that is not less. They do not have a car that maximizes both pilots at the same time. When one feels comfortable, the other suffers. And in such a tight championship, that is a luxury that Ferrari cannot afford. Deep down, Hamilton's arrival has altered the internal balances of the team. It is not just a new pilot. It is a figure that requires a custom structure, who is accustomed to working with engineers who understand their technical language. You need to feel listened to 100% operate. And Ferrari at this time seems more concerned with turning off fires than to build that relationship from the base. There is a point that many are overlooking. Hamilton did not sign a 5-year contract with Ferrari. Its link is limited, and both he and Toto Wolff know it. This movement was not an absolute farewell, but a pause. A pause that, depending on how the project evolves in Maranello and how Mercedes is reconfigured for the new regulatory era of 2026, could become an unexpected return. The arrival of the new technical regulations in 2026 represents a unique opportunity to reset the current hierarchy of Formula One. The engines will change, aerodynamics will be rethink, cars will be redesigned from scratch. In that context, experience, deep knowledge of development, and the ability to communicate sensations to the team become strategic assets. And what pilot, more than any other in the grid, embodies those qualities? Lewis Hamilton. And there is another element, perhaps the most important of all: legacy. Hamilton knows that his years in Formula One are counted. He has no 5 seasons left. And for someone with his career, finishing his career at the top is essential. He does not want to be remembered for past titles, but by how he knew how to reinvent himself. If Ferrari does not offer that platform, it will not be strange to see him look towards Brackley once more. The invisible alliance between Hamilton and Mercedes is, deep down, a pact of mutual respect, shared vision, and common objectives that transcend a contract. You do not need to be signed to exist. It is coded in the years of successes, in the defeats learned, in the history built together. And while circumstances evolve, that bond remains latent, waiting for its moment. Maybe that moment arrives in 2026, or maybe before. But what is clear now more than ever is that the game is not over. It has only changed board. And while everyone looks at Ferrari, the master play could be managed in the same place where Hamilton became a legend. In silence. In Mercedes. At this point, the story has ceased to be only on a pilot who changes equipment. It has become a much deeper story with multiple layers of analysis. We are talking about a battle of speeches, perceptions, power. Toto Wolff did not simply defend Lewis Hamilton. He reinserted him in the narrative as a piece still active in the construction of Mercedes's legacy. And with that, he achieved something unusual, to turn a rival into a symbol that still belongs to him. Ferrari, meanwhile, is being challenged in his own home. What seemed to be the most powerful movement of the signing market in years begins to generate doubts, internal tensions, and technical contradictions. Not due to lack of talent, but for a lack of alignment between expectations and reality. Can they be restructured before the pressure exceeds them? Or will they be trapped in another endless reconstruction cycle? That's why I want you to tell me. Do you think Toto Wolff really acted out of respect for Hamilton, or is he executing a long-term influence strategy? Can Ferrari survive this internal pressure without fracturing on the road? Leave it in the comments.